Hello and welcome to Imaginations from the Futures. My name is Zhao Ke, and I work in the University of Electronic Science and Technology of China in Chengdu, China. That's a very nice city. I am also working as a co-chair of the UMAC FUTURES, which is an organization or a group of young scholars from university museums around the world in the UMAC-ICOM. And I'm so glad today and these days to start this new project named the Imaginations from Futures. We plan to make online talks with young scholars from different university museums, from different countries and districts to listen to their voice from the future, to follow the imaginations from the futures. This project is like a kind of the description and observation of the current image by the young scholars, and also the imaginations from them to re-image and reconstruct the university museum after the pandemic. And I believe it will bring more hope, energy, and vitality to our community. So it is Chengdu time, 4 p.m., and it's also 9 a.m. London time, where our guest speaker today is. So let's welcome Dr. Federica Gigante. Am I right?
Gigante, yes.
Okay, that's great. From the History of Science Museum, University of Oxford, the United Kingdom. She's the first ever dedicated curator of the connection from the Islamic world, as Zhao Ke told me. And could you please say hello to the audience and give us a brief introduction of yourself and your institutions, Federica? Thank you.
Thank you so much for this very kind introduction, and I'm very happy to be here. As already mentioned, I am the curator of the collection from the Islamic world at the History of Science Museum in Oxford. And my chief role is that of looking after our collection of Islamic scientific instruments, which is the largest in the world as such, and reorganizing it in view of future restructuring of the museum and in theme with this project really for the future generations, for the students and the public who comes to Oxford.
Okay, thank you, Federica. And we are so glad having you here today to share your work experience and your research and your ideas about university museums, which is a very important place for us to teach and to research for the next generation, right? And from the perspective of young scholars, yes. We have just 4 simple questions for you. And the first one is, what is the specific project or program you are working on right now and why?
So the main project and research I'm doing at the moment is looking into the provenance of our collection, looking into how all the objects that we have in our museum, especially in the Islamic collection, have come to our museum. The museum was founded through the donation of a collector who lived at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, and brought together one of the most extraordinary collections of astrolabes. So scientific instruments from the past to chiefly calculate the time, but to make all sorts of astronomical and perhaps also astrological calculations. And many of these objects come from all over the world, from North Africa, from Iran, from the Middle East and India. And what I'm looking into at the moment is really to try and see the stories of these objects, why they came to Oxford and how they did. And each single object is a journey and a path on itself. I'm following each and single one of them and you can, through archival research, you can see how they traveled the world, and they were in different places at different times. And it's fascinating to basically create the biography of these items and be able to discuss why we have assembled them in Oxford and what we do with them, and to justify in a way why we have all these items.
Okay, get it, Federica. And astronomy is always a mystery for me, because I do not have much knowledge of that. But the objects I can see from the website of your museum, they looks very fascinating and attract me a lot. And yes, and I know a colleague called Taha from SIC. Yes, from Turkey, and it seems like he's specialized in that area, right? In the astrolab.
And he should have been in Oxford last year physically, but he couldn't because of the pandemic. He was with us in a sort of exchange remotely, and gave a lot of lectures at the History of Science Museum. He also makes these objects, like he reconstructs them today.
Yes.
To see how they worked in the past. What I find so fascinating about astrolabes is that they basically are like tablets or mobile phones of the past. They were expensive objects, much more common than we can think of. We have completely forgotten about them. And I'm sure that if someone with no knowledge sees what an astrolabe looks like, wouldn't probably recognize it. But people in the past were very familiar with them. They were used throughout the world. In Europe, the monks used them in their communities to calculate the time for their routines and their prayers. In the Islamic world, they used them to calculate the time the muezzin had to call the faithful to go for the prayer. And you can do all sorts of astronomical and astrological calculations. You can use it to make mathematical calculations. So that's why I consider it a bit of a tablet. Okay. Because you can tell the time, then you can turn it around and you can calculate distances, heights, measure angles, and have all sorts of apps on them.
Okay, so maybe that is the reason why there are so many scholars specialized in this area, like as you said, and you are so lucky you can work with the largest connection in the world, right? And yes, and from what you said, I can tell the astrolab is like a hub. It's like a hub with you can use it to work with your life, with your true life, real life around you, around the man, right? And you can also use it to chase from something in your spirit.
Oh, absolutely. That's exactly what you could do with that. You would have different levels. You can use it for a very concrete daily routine, like tell the time. Then for your longer lifespan, because it might help you with the seasons. If you work with the land and you need to know when's the time to sow your grains and when's the time to water, and you can use that, and then you can go into your spiritual life and use it to connect with God, and further you can cast a horoscope.
Wow.
You can predict the future.
Wow. So
this is what modern phones can't do.
Yes, so it's so amazing that this thing you tell us, and this is for the first question. Yes, and I'm so fascinated by the astrolabe, and I couldn't wait to go to University of Oxford to see them. Thank you. And let's move to the second question. If you are creating an exhibition, what object do you want to collect or display most related to the past 2 years experience?
Well, you can guess I would tell you it is an astrolabe, but in particular, I am now working and studying one object in our collection, and that's certainly the one I will choose to answer your question. And it's a very special astrolabe because it has a geared mechanism. So it's quite thick, and on the inside there are all sorts of cogs and wheels that connect and create a moving mechanism. And in this mechanism, you can calculate eclipses and the movement of the sun and of the moon. You can calculate the phases of the moon and the days of the lunar calendar, and everything moves at the unison. Everything moves at the same time when you turn a little pin in the middle. And it's basically a machine, but it's a hidden machine. And I find it so fascinating because I tried it myself and it's perfectly correct. And it can tell you when the moon and the sun align, and maybe there is a solar eclipses. And this would give you a great power if you were the possessor of that instrument, because you would literally predict the future by saying, in a few days' time, the sun will become obscured and night will fall in the middle of the day. And I find it just the most incredible object, and is the oldest such object in the world. It comes from Iran and dates from the 13th century.
That's great. That's great. It seems like you, in the past 2 years, the pandemic didn't affect your work, and you are always specialized in your field, in your area. That's very great, and you opened a brand new door for me. Okay, I didn't know much about this object, and but in SIC, you know, and in some organizations, when we have presentation and discussion, I've met many scholars who research on the astrolabe. Yes, and I get it. It's very important in the astronomy, in the history of science. Okay, let's move to the third question. When the COVID-19 is completely gone, what do you want to do most related to university museums?
Well, one of the first things I'd like the most is to see the students and the people really back using or working on our collection. But one of the chief things I would like to work on is really a redisplay of the museum. And this is in line with a big project we have at the History of Science Museum in Oxford for the centenary of the opening of the museum in 2024. So we would like to refurbish the museum and change it completely and rethink about the way we display the objects. Because as you said, many of these items, these historical items, are fascinating and they encompass so many different fields, but at the same time, they're beautiful works of art. And I think we should really make the effort to showcase that and highlight it. The museum at the moment has a very old-fashioned approach of just displaying everything on the shelves without much storytelling. And what I'd really like to do next is to bring out the stories of each object and highlight it as a single individual item for people to really engage with them. And one other thing that I would very much like to do is to give the chance to the public to handle some of these objects, replicas and copies, but to really put their hands on them and see how they worked. And this is, of course, something we couldn't do during the pandemic because we couldn't touch things and it would really be at the top of my list.
Wow, that sounds very amazing. It reminds me that that is also a challenge for us because we displayed objects in a traditional way in our museum, and sometimes it's very professional for some for the public, the citizens, and some guys told me that you should do something disciplinary with art, you know. So that is also a challenge for us, and it reminds me another interesting thing in your museum, because in the website we can see a photo of the virus model.
Yes.
Yes,
Indeed.
It's beautiful.
That's a work of art, isn't it?
Yes, it's very beautiful, and I checked the information, and the artist said if someone imagines that the virus like this, the model, it is in your body, you can imagine what is the feeling. So
yeah.
yes.
That is the, not so much the virus itself, it is the AstraZeneca vaccine.
Okay.
So yeah. It's a modification of the virus is what they inject you, and it was, the connection is that it was created in Oxford, of course, and so hence the sculpture is in our museum. But it is a beautiful thing.
It's beautiful, and it's a combination from a museum, from an artist, and the scientist, right?
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yes, very beautiful. So let's move to the last question. We called this question in a bottle. It's like a sort of message in a bottle, because it's kind of relay question. Your question is from the last speaker, the last guest speaker, Mariana from Argentina, and she asked, what's positive aspect can you recover from what you are doing during the pandemic, and will you change your work at the museum?
Oh, absolutely, we will change the way we work. Certainly we learned a lot, because we were obliged to change the ways we interact with the public and we work behind the curtains. We will retain, and I would love to retain, all the digital aspects. So we engaged a lot more with the public on the website. We created a lot more online content and digital content that before was considered secondary and not important. But of course, during the last 1.5 years, it's been essential, sometimes been the only face of the museum. But at the same time, it has also changed the way we work between colleagues, because we realize the importance of working on the collection, but at the same time, the flexibility of work, such as being able to work from home if one doesn't need to be physically in the museum or in the office. And this flexibility is something that we'd certainly like to retain for the future.
And how is your teaching for now? The online teaching or something like that?
So teaching has been going on online only until now, but term is starting next month in Oxford.
Next month, okay.
And students are going to be back in person. So from next month, and the next lessons, the next teaching will actually be done in person. And I'm hoping that in the springtime, so the term that starts next year, I will be able to have some students physically in the museum handling the objects and putting their hands on for the first time in the last 2 years.
That's good. Good to hear that. We are lucky because we have students from last year. In September 2020, we have students back to the schoolyard, and we have some students in our museum. We work together for the replication of Hertz experiment or Enigma Machine. That's a project we are working on. Yes, most of the colleagues in the world, they replicate the Enigma machine, just as a mechanic part, and the other one maybe use some software or something. But our students, they are working on that and try to replicate the original circuit diagram. So I think it's a very interesting project, and they can come back to the university. That's a very good factor for us to work on the project. And I believe that next month you'll have students to help you and work with you. That's a very good news. Yes. Okay, Federica, and that is a question in a bottle. So you have to propose your question to the next speaker.
Right. So my question to the next speaker, as we are talking about university museums, is one of the most fundamental issues I have been dealing with and asking myself, how do you balance the fact of being a university museum? So for students, for experts, for people who'd like to really go into details because they are doing a course, they're studying something in particular, or for the scholars who teach at the university. At the same time, being a museum, so open to the public, open for people who don't have that inner knowledge. How do you balance that? How do you set the right tone that would fit both the general public and the university public?
Wow, that is good, really a good question. Because balance is always the problem, always the question for us to answer. Not only, I think your question is more general. It's more general for us, for the colleagues in university museums, we have to think about. And in our museum, we are not only the general question, but we have to face another question, because we have a course named the History of Science, History of Electronic Science and Technology. At first, we just opened one course for freshmen, sophomore, and senior students. But with the development of this course and with the development of this museum, we found that we have to open different level courses for different students. Yes, maybe we have to figure out how to balance that.
Yes.
Yes, and for now we have to figure out how to balance the online teaching and the offline teaching. So that is also a challenge for us. Yes, you proposed a very good question, and it's challenging for the next speaker. I'll tell you the answer when she or he answers the question. Okay.
Great.
And yes, and we can subscribe the channel of UMAC in YouTube. Yeah, we'll upload the video to the YouTube channel. So it's almost at the end of the formal interview. It was really a very fruitful conversation with you, Federica, and thank you for your time. Of course, thanks to our audience. Maybe in the future, now they cannot watch the video. And thank you so much. And I really hope them can enjoy it and join us together. And the last, let's see our slogan. UMAC Futures, we are coming. And that's all from me today. See you next time. Goodbye.